It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our first technical session, Energy Demand, New Trends, moderated by Yves Bamberger from the National Academy of Technologies of France.
Hello everyone, I don't see you unfortunately. I am Yves Bamberger and have the honor to be the moderator of our session 1. I am civil engineer by training. I have been working for EDF, Électricité de France, which is still one of the biggest electric utilities in the world, with more than 40 million customers, distribution and transmission networks, hydro and nuclear generation, wind and solar, etc. I am a member of the French Academy of Technology. I want first thanks Oscar Vignard and Manuel Solanet for inviting me and congratulate all the Argentinian team for organizing CAETS 2021. The title of our session is Energy Demand, New Trend. It is logic to begin with the demand side and not with the generation side, since the generation is made for the demand. Even if the demand has in some cases also to be somehow adapted to the generation capacity, as I will explain in my presentation later. There are three main new trends. The first one is the necessity to satisfy the increasing demand from the emerging countries, but also the needs from the low-income people in other countries, in particular in suburbs area. The second one is the development of new energy use. The digital world, internet, and all related communications and data is the most visible one. But the development of healthcare, I would say electric healthcare, and still increasing demand for mobility are the two others, even if the outbreak we are facing could have an impact on this factor. The third trend is the impact of the still increasing world population, which won't stop over the next decades. These new trends, emerging countries and low-income people needs, new energy use, increasing population, lead to a growing energy demand. Since the sun sends us every day far more energy than we need, we may theoretically have as much energy as we need. There are also resources for nuclear electricity for centuries, but there is a huge but. But with the climate change issues and growing concerns on environment and many resources, which were confirmed by the previous speakers, it is clear that we have to reduce rapidly and drastically the direct and indirect impacts of energy use, especially the greenhouse gas emissions, in particular CO2 and methane. To do that, electrification with low carbon electricity is one of the key solutions, and as it is more and more understood and done worldwide. But we are still far from decarbonization, since, as mentioned by Fatih Birol before, around 80% of the final consumption is provided directly by fossil fuels. The electricity used for the 20 other percent are containing more than 400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. During our session, after some general remarks I will present, we will have the opportunities to look deeper on essential issues concerning energy demand. Andrea Heins from the Argentinian Committee of the World Energy Council will address buildings issues and also some human dimensions. Concerning mobility, we will listen Chang Kim, research engineer from Hyundai, the great car company. We will then look precisely which are the roles from networks and storage with our colleague experts in these questions, Professor Lachlan Blackhall from Australian National University. And finally, we will benefit from an holistic analysis concerning energy in South Korea by Professor Seung Moon from Seoul National University in Korea. Then especially in this, something special in our session. Ben Hutt from the Australian company Evergen and Ivar Krusenberg from the Estonian firm Power Up Energy Technologies will share brief presentations that have been selected by the World Energy Council as finalists for the Startup Energy Transition Awards. I would like to encourage all of you to submit written questions to the panel through the Zoom chat during this meeting, and we will address them after the presentations. I hope you will enjoy participating to this session on demand. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I begin now my presentation. I will try to develop some introductory remarks on energy demand and decarbonization. The first question that we are facing, and which is often discussed, do we have enough resources, enough energy resources to realize the decarbonization? Here I show you in this slide that we have no limit, I would say, in low carbon energy resources, because the sun is sending us every day or all the year around 8,000 energy more than we need. It means that there are no limits concerning the resources coming from the sun. And we also could use, if we want, nuclear fission, which could cover many centuries. So the key question is not to limit energy demand, but it's to decouple the energy demand from the CO2 and methane emissions. That is the key question. Sure, if we use less energy, there are less emissions, but the key point is to decouple them. It's not to limit energy demand, because we need energy, especially for the emerging countries. But we have to make the right choices. And to make the right choices, the politicians and everybody, we have to choose the right indicators. I propose first to remind you that low primary energy consumption is not the same than low carbon emission. I will give you a very simple example concerning two identical houses that you have on the slide. I suppose their heating needs during the year is 4 megawatt hour. And I will precise some characteristics from the country where they are. They are in a country where, sorry, I will be a bit technical a few minutes ago, but you are scientists, you are engineers, you are not afraid by numbers. I suppose the electricity mix is containing half renewables, 50%, 25% nuclear, and 25% thermal fossil, coal or gas. Probably more gas, because I suppose the efficiency is around 50%, and the CO2 content of the kilowatt hour from the thermal plants is 400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. In that case, following the International Energy Agency definitions, primary energy, the ratio between primary energy and final energy is 1.75. And the content of the CO2, of the electricity from the countries is 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is relatively low. So I still have the heating needs from the two homes, and I look what happens with two different solutions. On the left side, I have a home which is heated by a gas furnace, and she's using in primary energy the 4 megawatt hour. The consumption is then 4 megawatt hour gas, and the production of the emissions for the year heating is, you see that, 880 kilo of CO2. We move now to the other house, which is using a heat pump, an electric heat pumps with this. And you see that the primary energy is higher due to the coefficient, due to the 1.75 0.75 coefficient. The consumption of electricity is lower, coming from the COP. And at the end, we have only 133 kilo CO2 per year, or emitted per year. You see here, the electric house is using more primary energy, which is an administrative definition, but it's always often used in statistics and so on. So primary energy here is higher for the electric home, but is lower, but the CO2 emissions are lower for this electric home. So you see, you have to choose the right indicators. And the right indicators are low carbon directly or final consumption. My second remark is concerning the policy that you could push to decrease the carbon emissions. Often we see in the documents, in the official documents, in the what is written everywhere, energy efficiency, energy efficiency, energy efficiency. But energy efficiency first is not the same that low carbon first. And I will give you a simple example. I still keep the same home or house than before that you have here on the left, and I will make two different choices, political choices. The first one is to insulate. It means it's energy efficiency, it's deep refurbishment of the house. So you divide it by two, the need of energy, of heating energy, and you go to 2 megawatt hour of gas, you will produce 440 kilo CO2 a year. The second choice, you are doing no insulation, you replace the gas furnace by a heat pump, and you see you will produce or emit only 133 kilo CO2 with the same electricity mix that I described a few minutes ago. It is in the same country. So you see in this example, if you are saying energy efficiency first, you will do the first choice. If you are saying low carbon first, you will do the second choice. That are different policies. And if you think to your own country, you could look what is done, what is decided, what is pushed. My third comment is on which vector you may use, energy vectors you may use to decarbonize. And which is the first. At the beginning, you may have two types of situation. Direct use of sun, or fossil, or biomass, or indirect use from sources. It means use of heat network or use of electricity. If you are using directly sun, like for some water heater on the roof, that's marvelous. It's already decarbonated. If you are using electricity, you have to decarbonize it with renewable or nuclear. If you are using heating network, you may use waste. You may use also some renewables or use decarbonated electricity, depending from the situation. The direct use of biomass you may discuss, because on one side you say the biomass is renewable, but when you are burning the biomass, you are producing CO2. So it has to be discussed in each context. And direct use of fossil, you have to do CCS, and if not possible or not affordable, you have to replace them. And how will you replace the fossil? Probably by electricity, in some cases perhaps by decarbonated hydrogen, I hope, or reusing some waste energy. It's interesting to present that, I would say, optimistically. It means I see how many kilowatt hour I will produce for a certain level of CO2 emissions. It's what I am showing here on the right of the slide. If you are using some coal or some relatively badly decarbonated electricity, you will produce 2.5 kilowatt-hour per kilo of CO2. If you are performant, if you are like photovoltaic panels or like wind energy, like nuclear energy, and naturally like hydro, you will be around 25 kilowatt-hour per kilo of CO2, which means that you are relatively efficient or very, very efficient, I would say, thinking to the low carbon society that we have to build. My next comment is on the technologies that you will use. We have very good available technologies already, even if research it's clearly needed. The first family, which is a family which is in real development and already used, and it's a good thing, is a family of heat pumps in different contexts, which are indicated on this slide. And heat pumps are regularly, every year, I would say, in progress. The second group of technologies concerning mobility is the group of the electric vehicles and the hybrid vehicles, in some cases hydrogen vehicles, and also hydrogen or low carbon electricity is to push in the industrial processes. So you have here, I would say, three families of processes and technologies which are available and which has to be pushed to decarbonize, because we have to decarbonize as soon as possible, as was said by our first speaker. The CO2 and the methane are staying in the sky, in the atmosphere. So the time scale of what we are doing is very important, and we are replacing our heat pumps, our furnaces, our cars every 15 years, perhaps 20 years or more. So we have to really address this timescale issue, the urgency. It means that we have to use the best available technologies, and we don't have to wait for the future technologies, even if we are hoping and probably we are sure they will be better, but we don't have to wait. We have to act now. Other way to adjust to decarbonize, which is more a systemic approach in the electric world, is to adjust the demand to generation. I show here on the slide different ways to decarbonate, to help the decarbonization of electricity, to the coupling, a better coupling between the demand and the generation. But I'm sure you are knowing that. Now the people are saying it's flexibility of the demand, but it has been done for 50, 70 years by many utilities in the world. Even if it was more done for heating water, for water heater, or for some cooling systems, and not 70 years ago for electric vehicle batteries. But the idea is the same. To conclude, I will come to the last, but perhaps the first key point, is to motivate the people, motivate every citizen in the world, motivate the policymakers, motivate all the stakeholders, the industry, to do the mutation. And for that, I think we need regulations, we need discussions, because the interests may be contradictory. We have to make subsidies. So you know all that. We are in different situations in the different countries, but each country is acting now to do the mutation. And I think, to conclude, I prefer to say we increase something that we decrease something. So I think it's a more positive view to say we have to increase the number of kilowatt hour we are able to use when we are looking on this ratio between the kilowatt hour and the kilo of CO2 necessary to produce it. Now for the electric system in the world, in average, we are around 2.5 kilowatt hour per kilo of CO2. It means 400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour worldwide in average. We have to reach 10 times that around 2050. It means 25. So you see the progress that we have to make. I thank you very much, and I hope I will have many questions. And if you allow me, I will add that I published recently with a Swiss colleague a book on these subjects, and I will be happy if you go through these books. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody, and also good afternoon, because we have people participating from different countries. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the World Energy Council Argentinian Committee, being part of this panel. I want to especially thank the Council of Academies of Engineering and Technological Science for this invitation. I will share with you the role of energy efficiency in the decarbonization pathway with focus on the building sector. The World Energy Council puts forward the need to think about energy transition not only for planet, but also for people, which it called humanization the energy, or humanization the energy transition. It involves people to ensure clean, affordable, reliable, and equitable energy for all. I invite you to keep in mind this during this discussion. The global role of energy has evolved over the last 100 years, moving from a focus on diversification of supply and development of new technology to a focus on decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. During the last World Energy Congress in Abu Dhabi, we noted a shift in leadership mindset to demand-driven solutions and started to explore the implication of the new customer-centric energy future. That's why the World Energy Council proposed to add a 4D to the 3 key global drivers of change, including the disruption by demand, as we can see on the right side. The new pattern of this disruption by demand highlights the ways in which energy is being used in changing fast. The new pattern of disruption by demand involves a pool of people and direct attention to affordability, reliability, and equity. It is not only change in technologies, but also change in energy customer behavior. So we operate in an area of energy for planet and people. There is a new imperative of global energy transition. We have an agenda with needs of more energy and at the same time climate neutrality to ensure sustainable energy for all. A couple of months ago, the International Energy Agency published a report, Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. This report outlines the essential conditions for the global energy sector to reach net zero CO2 by 2050. The pathway proposed is designed to maximize technical feasibility, cost effectiveness, and social acceptance while ensuring continued economic growth and secure energy supply. Building sector has a key role in the energy demand scenario. Globally, floor area is expected to increase 75% between 2020 and 2050, of which 80% is in emerging markets and developing economies. This is equivalent to the surface of the city of Paris added every week through 2050. The surface of a new Paris every week. It's a lot. Moreover, buildings in many advanced economies have long lifetimes, and around half of the existing buildings stock will still be standing in 2050. This remarks the importance of retrofits. Also, demands for appliances and cooling equipment are continued to grow, especially, again, in emerging countries and developing economies. Where 650 million new air conditioners will be by 2030, and we will have 2 billion new air conditioners by 2050, 2 billion of new air conditioners. So, despite this demand growth, total CO2 emissions from the building sector declined by more than 95% in the net zero emissions scenario, in this scenario, and this decline basically is regarding energy efficiency, behavioral change, and electrification. We are declining from almost 3 gigatons of CO2 to 120 megatons of CO2 in 2050. As I said, energy efficiency and electrification are the two main drivers, and also behavioral change that is here has a key role. If we focus on energy efficiency and behavioral changes, we account for 47% and 40% of the reduction by 2030 and 2050 respectively. This transformation include already available technology in the market, improve in the envelopes for new and existing buildings, heat pumps, energy efficient appliance, via climatic and material efficient building design, and again, the inclusion of behavioral changes, the way that consumers will use this new technology, this existing technology in the future. On the side of fuels, the reduction of fossil fuels is in buildings will be dropped from almost 30% of the energy demand in buildings to less than 2% by 2050. Space heating demand also drops by two-thirds between 2020 here to 2050, and this is regarding energy efficiency and behavioral change, especially with focus on in the adjustment of temperature set points. The roadmap for buildings, the roadmap for net zero buildings requires improved energy efficiency and completely shift away from fossil fuels. To get this goal, by 2050, more than 85% of buildings need to comply with zero carbon ready building energy codes. This requires that zero carbon ready energy codes for all new buildings need to be introduced by 2030, and retrofits need to be carried out by 50% of existing buildings by 2040. In the side of retrofits, currently the retrofit rate is about 1% per year in developed countries. In some regions it's lower than that number, especially in Latin America and other emerging regions. This rate is required to improve to 2.5% per year by 2030, and in some economies 2% per year, especially in emerging markets and developing economies. This is equivalent of 2 million dwellings per year on average by 2030. 20 million dwellings per year on average. It's a huge number. On the side of appliances, electric appliances and lighting should become much more efficient over the next 3 decades, thanks to policy measures and technical advances. This roadmap supposes that there are no new sales of fossil fuel boilers by 2025. Also, it assumes that By 2025, at the same year, the 100% of the sales of LED lamps will be 100% of the sales will be LED lamps. And by 2035, most appliances and cooling systems sold are best in class. It means having minimum energy performance standards from high level of standards, of energy standards. And all of this should happen in a context of universal energy access for all by 2030. This is a very, very challenged ambition. And what is the role of behavioral changes that we mentioned? The decarbonization scenario cannot be reached without the sustained support and participation of citizens, not only in building sectors, but also in other sectors like transport, electrical mobility, and others. Behavioral changes will contribute in the 4% of the emission reduction by 2050, based on some changes, specific changes. For example, by 2030, reduce excessive hot water temperatures, adjusting the average space heating temperature in 19-20 degrees C, the average space cooling temperature in 24-25 degrees C, reduction in the use of energy-intensive materials per unit floor area in 30%, and increase the building's lifetime in 20% also. Although are the citizens the ones that will modify their behavior, most of this behavioral change will be promoted by regulation and mandates that could enable almost 70% of the emissions saved by behavioral changes. These are some mandates that the IEA is viewing to be necessarily implemented. Which are the drivers and enablers to make it happen? We will need laws and regulations. These laws and regulations are based and are implemented in a lot of developed countries and are under implementation in several developing countries, but should be fostered. Especially building codes, minimum energy performance standards, mandatory requirements for retrofits, new buildings, among others. The development of financial and economic incentives and models for energy efficiency and zero emission investments. The labeling and public awareness campaigns to foster behavior change. And accelerate the collaboration between governments, private sector, and civil society. We can affirm that most of these elements are available. The technology is there, already exists. There are several leading cases that we can use as benchmark about regulation, about financial models, about public awareness. We have a lot of reference to take as benchmark and to deploy in other countries and other regions. The challenge is to move forward and deploy and scale up these solutions. As the president of COP26 clearly stated, it is time for the world to move from a decade of climate change deliberation to a decade of delivery. The challenge is to develop, foster, strengthen this delivery as soon as possible, keeping in mind that the world needs more and better energies to ensure sustainable energy for all, so that no one is left behind. This is not only about planet, this is also about people. It is not just a commitment, it is a responsibility and even a moral obligation for all of us As leaders, regardless our position in governments, in the academy, in the private sector, in the civil society, we have the responsibility to create the conditions to make it happen. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Chang Hwan Kim from Hyundai Motor Group. First of all, I would like to thank organizing committee for giving me opportunity to present our recent movement in electrification for our product. And it's my great honor to present in the most prestigious the Group International Council of Academies of Engineering and Technology Sciences. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and probably many of you may think that why the chemical engineer in car company. Well, these days the climate change has been a very significant in mobility, and this challenge today's mobility includes the climate change, urbanization, particles, noise, and CO2. But there is worldwide efforts to protect the nature and overcome this environmental crisis. As you know, 6 years ago, there was a Paris Agreement on the reduction of climate change, and automotive industry is facing big changes and challenges. It is our responsible to reduce CO2 with the Green Deals. And there is a definite paradigm shift. It's ongoing, and governments around the world have tightened CO2 emission regulations for new vehicle models by 4 to 5% each year since 2015. So to reduce or to mitigate the climate change, the carbon neutral mobility is very crucial. And all the global movements also are moving towards to the decarbonization in the 21st century via renewables and green hydrogen. In fact, the Korea announced about a year ago the Green New Deal, showing the hydrogen changing the whole energy portfolio in the green hydrogen in next decades. And there are many similar movements in the worldwide. As a car company, our power source has been heavily depending on the conventional internal combustion engines. But with this transition, we are moving we are taking the three strategies. The first one is we continuously improve our our engine's efficiency, and also we reduce the weight so that we have a better fuel economy with the existing powertrain. Also, we hybridize in our portfolio propulsion systems, combining combustion and electrification. So we have from the mild hybrid to up to plug-in hybrid systems. And ultimately, we have a product portfolio in the battery electric and also fuel cell electric vehicles. Speaking of the electric vehicles, we have started the first pure EV in the early 2011. And since then, we have introduced several models for our EV portfolio. And last year, we have sold more than the 50,000 combined for the first 6 months in 2020, which is right behind the Tesla. And going forwards, we have introduced the Ionic brand last year, showing that we have a pure electric vehicle from the small SUV to the high performance sedan and the full size SUV for next 2 to 3 years. In fact, last month, Ioniq 5 was introduced, and it is being very popular in the market. Speaking of the EV system, the long-range EV system has utilized the state-of-the-art battery technology. This lithium-ion battery technology offer the longer range of the vehicle per charge, but the more batteries cost more price. So it also has a charging time challenge as well, compared to the conventional gasoline or diesel fuels or the fuel cell electric vehicles. So if I kind of look at the technology advancement in the battery uh, applications, um, the future dedicated EV platforms will be equipped with the lighter, smaller, safer, and cheaper batteries. As you see in the chart in the left-hand side, the EV penetration is quite aggressive, and every year we see some different trends. And the lithium-ion battery cost has come down significantly, but still, to compete with the internal combustion engines, for the better availability to our customers, it needs to go a lot cheaper also. But in terms of performance, for the better EV, all the OEMs are looking for better range, and the better durability, and a safer battery system, and high performance, and less charging time. All these kind of five the performance categories, there are next generation batteries being discussed, how we can make it safer by kind of applying the solid electrolytes. Also, how we can improve the energy density by changing the bulky components in the current battery systems. Speaking of the energy density, one of the key enabling technology for the next generation high energy density battery is the lithium metal anode technology. Current lithium-ion battery use the quite bulky graphite anode, although the performance and the durability-wise are quite significant. But the people in industry, the battery industry, are trying to reduce the volume and weight of the anode components by replacing graphite with the lithium metal. And the lithium metal battery can be a good transition from the lithium ion battery, as it shares a lot of manufacturing facilities and equipment. And beyond, their lithium sulfur and lithium air systems can be ultimately for the high energy density and the low cost battery systems. And speaking of the lithium metal battery, we already have achieved the high energy density compared to the lithium ion state of the art technology. And also we are achieving some of the high cycle durability for the new technology. And let me kind of shift my talk a little bit to the more how this battery technology needs to move forwards in terms of the greenhouse emissions for in its life cycle um, management. Uh, if you look at the life cycle analysis results from the different vehicles, and comparing the conventional IC versus electric vehicles, all the countries' power mix really determines how much CO2 being emitted from the fuel cycle, or which means operation, how much the battery requires the CO2 emission. In fact, the battery production is a greenhouse gas intensive, and its amount can be as much as 50% of the total manufacturing CO2 emissions. If you look at the green portion of the electric vehicles, that's quite significant and is as much as the manufacturing CO2 emissions. And also, the regional effect is quite significant, even for the manufacturing side. If you compare the right bar uh, in this chart, the China and USA have a different power mix, so it gives a different the CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour power energy consumptions. But if you look at this the chart, it can be differentiated up to more than 20%. So we have to make every effort to reduce the CO2 footprint for the battery technology for the sustainable future. Let me shift my gear to our fuel cell vehicles. Hyundai Motor Company has the world's first mass-produced fuel cell EV from 2013. We released the next generation of the fuel cell vehicle called Nexo 3 years ago, and the volume has increased quite a bit, and we are expanding our fuel cell technology to the non-passenger vehicle, such as the fuel cell electric truck and also buses. And our promotion of non-automotive business is expanding also, such as ship, train, and urban air mobility. For the next generation fuel cell technology, it has to reduce the cost of the fuel cell stack. Of course, there's some kind of significant portion from the hydrogen compressed hydrogen tank, but also the fuel cell stack is like an engine in the conventional vehicles. So we have to have a high performance catalyst for more durable and high power with less PGMs. So we are continuously working to improve our fuel cell technology by trying the different fuel cell catalysts, which we call it intermetallic catalyst, that has a very high engineering challenges. And then as you see that we are significantly improving our performance, even with the platinum usage reduced by almost to 75%. And this is going to be our kind of future directions to make the much kind of a low cost fuel cell systems, so that better penetrations in the market. Also, I have to emphasize that the CO2 emission amount during the hydrogen production is very critical for sustainable mobility to respond this global climate change and regulation. So this green hydrogen production is very high cost technology, but we have to keep reducing the cost. And also blue hydrogen can be a good ultimate solution in the meantime. But hydrogen from the renewable energy will offer some of the other synthetic fuels and for conventional engines for carbon neutral technology as well. So let me summarize my talk. The automotive industry is in great transition toward electrifications for the next 5 to 10 years. And the future dedicated EV platforms will be equipped with lighter, smaller, safer, and cheaper batteries optimized for flexible capacity and performance. And it is very important to have a technical leadership in the lithium metal anodes for the future next generation battery technology. Our continuous efforts is being done to develop the better fuel cell catalysts, which is very crucial for larger and faster penetration of the fuel cell EV. Our journey for sustainable mobility will ultimately require how to minimize the carbon footprint in the electrification for automotive industry. So this is not a easy problem to solve. This is one of, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is one of the greatest engineering masterpieces to respond or to bring solutions for the carbon neutral mobility system. So we have a great portfolio in engine, fuel cell, battery, and hydrogen storage, and hope we can offer the better technology for our customers and make carbon neutral mobility happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'll be happy to answer any questions through the emails that can be provided by the organizing committee. And thank you again for giving me this great opportunity. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today to give this presentation, and my thanks for the invitation to do so. Before I begin my presentation, please allow me to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. which for me is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. In this presentation today, I'm going to be talking about grid edge technologies, including distributed energy resources and microgrids. I'm based in Australia, and so I'm going to provide perspectives about grid edge technologies in the Australian context. However, as we will see, Australia is a global leader in grid edge technologies and distributed energy resources. So it's important to understand the Australian context and how the lessons learned here are applicable to the rest of the world. As we begin, I'd like to talk about the global context in which we find ourselves. And the best place to start talking about that context is obviously the really significant increase in the deployment of renewable energy generation. Globally, we're already seeing significant uptake in grid-scale wind and solar generation. And as you can see in the graphic on this slide, the uptake of renewables over the coming decades is going to be really significant. Obviously, this is vital if we are to achieve the global decarbonisation targets, which overwhelmingly for most countries are being set at net zero emissions by the year 2050. Crucially, the economics of renewable generation as the cheapest form of new build generation are also supporting this significant uptake. The other key trend that we see is the increasing decentralisation of electricity systems. On the graphic that you see on this slide, I'd like to focus on two key elements. The first is obviously the significant decentralisation that's occurring in electricity systems all over the world. But secondly, I'd like to highlight that Australia will soon have the most decentralised electricity system anywhere in the world. This trend will accelerate over the decades ahead as this increasing decentralisation is driven by the uptake of distributed generation and storage and electric vehicles, which are some of the grid edge technologies that I'll be talking about today. So if we take the context of a significant amount of renewable generation and significant amounts of electricity decentralisation, what is our future electricity system going to look like? Well, the graphic you can see on this slide from the International Renewable Energy Agency captures exactly the kind of future electricity system that we're heading towards. Our traditional electricity system has large centralised fossil fuel-fired generation connected via transmission and distribution networks, where energy flowed from generation to demand. In contrast, our future electricity system is going to have significant amounts of renewable utility-scale generation at one end, and at the other end of the system, we're going to have significant amounts of distributed energy generation and storage. Instead of the traditional one-way energy flows, we're going to experience dynamic two-way flows of energy between where it is generated to where it is consumed. Connecting this utility-scale generation to these grid edge technologies and distributed energy resources will be the distribution network, which will play an increasingly important role as the electricity superhighway of the future. So when it comes to thinking about grid edge technologies and distributed energy resources, we really have to begin with residential solar PV. Australia is a really interesting case study in this example because Australia has the highest per capita adoption of solar PV of anywhere in the world. Currently, over 2.5 million homes in Australia have solar on their roof, which means that in some parts of our grid, 1 in 3 homes have already adopted solar generation. The reason that Australians have adopted solar at such scale really comes down to a couple of factors. If you go back a decade, solar PV was supported by government subsidies. And so it made economic sense to invest, even though the cost of solar PV in absolute terms was high at the time. Over the years since, Australians have taken up solar PV because they care about reducing their carbon emissions due to electricity generation, but also because solar has continued to decline in price so significantly that it continues to make economic sense in the absence of these previous subsidies. You can see the truly remarkable decline in the cost of solar PV in the second image on this slide. The graph at the bottom of this slide was taken from the most recent Integrated System Plan, which is a biannual planning study undertaken by the Australian Energy Market Operator, and highlights the really significant uptake of solar PV that Australia is going to continue to see over the decades ahead. No discussion about grid edge technologies is complete without understanding that the grid edge is going to host a truly remarkable amount of solar generation in the decades to come. So while customers have adopted really significant amounts of solar generation today, when we come to thinking about the implications of all of that solar on our grid, we realize something quite striking. And that's that while customers are investing in solar for their own benefit, there's actually quite a significant mismatch between the time when solar typically generates and the time when most customers actually consume energy. You can see on this slide a comparison between the times at which energy is generated and when it is consumed. And we're using data here from the ACT government's next-gen battery storage program. The image on the right-hand side shows that, as you would expect, solar generation occurs during the day. The left-hand side image shows that customers typically use energy in the mornings and in the evenings. This mismatch between generation and demand is driving the thinking and development of the grid edge technologies and capabilities that are starting to emerge. So what happens when your solar generation doesn't correspond with your demand? Well, this can lead to a situation where in some cases we have quite significant reverse flows of energy back into the grid. While the components in our electricity system really don't care about which direction the energy is flowing, the operating paradigm that we have for our grid is not particularly well suited for these reverse flows. And this is leading to both network and system issues here in Australia. On the network side, we're starting to see an increase in the dynamic range of voltage, making it harder to remain within the prescribed voltage limits within the distribution network. On the other hand, at the system level, we're finding that this significant amount of solar generation during the day is leading to issues of minimum operational demand, making it challenging to guarantee the secure operation of the system due to reduced inertia and system strength. In response to these challenges, we've developed something we call dynamic operating envelopes that allow us to dynamically calculate, allocate, and publish the available network and system capacity available to solar generation and to other grid edge technologies. By deploying dynamic operating envelopes nationally, we're demonstrating how we can address both the network and system challenges whilst still allowing customers to continue to install significant amounts of solar generation and distributed energy resources. Obviously, another way that we can start to think about managing all of this solar generation is to deploy energy storage. In addition to the uptake of utility scale batteries, we're also seeing very significant uptake of residential batteries and emerging interest in medium scale storage, which we refer to as neighbourhood batteries. Both residential and neighbourhood batteries are located physically and electrically close to the solar generation and are able to charge up during the day when we have significant amounts of solar generation and discharge back into the grid to satisfy customer electricity demand in the evening. Once you have all of this battery storage installed though, whether it's residential battery storage installed in people's homes or neighbourhood batteries installed in the suburbs, you need to think about what you're going to do with it and how you're going to utilise that battery storage most effectively. We've already highlighted the role that battery storage can play in capturing solar generation and shifting it from the time when it's generated to times when it's needed. But obviously, battery storage can do much, much more than just shift energy. Battery storage can also participate in markets for energy and ancillary services, and it can support the operation of the network by better managing voltage and thermal constraints. In Australia, the participation of batteries in markets for energy, ancillary and network services is typically achieved through virtual power plants or VPPs. A virtual power plant is a way of bringing together all of those individual solar and storage units and making them effectively operate as one large power plant. In this way, virtual power plants allow network and system operators to think of these grid edge technologies and DER as being effective replacements for the large, centralized fossil fuel-fired generators which they are replacing. However, one of the interesting considerations that arises when you start to use customer-owned assets to participate in the operation of the energy and electricity system is that you have to be really careful about the algorithmic choices that you make about how these devices will operate. And in this context, I'd like to tell you an instructive tale. Prior to my current role, I was developing virtual power plant software and capabilities. And one of the very early systems that we rolled out and deployed had a customer call up and say that one of the algorithms we were using was making his wife sad. When I first thought about it, I didn't really understand how an algorithm could make anybody sad, particularly as the algorithm in question was simply calculating when to charge the battery throughout the day. Our algorithmic choice was to trickle charge the battery through the day so that the battery would be full when the sun set, ready to be used to satisfy the evening electricity demand. However, as this customer rightly pointed out to me, they had invested quite a lot of money in a solar and battery system. And so they weren't happy when they saw their solar energy being exported onto the grid before the battery was full. In response to this feedback, we actually changed how the battery was charged, and we implemented what we called greedy solar mode, meaning that we first charged the battery from solar until it was full before we would then export excess solar generation into the grid. Now, naturally, this seemed like a great solution to the customer's problem, and we rolled out this capability to our other customers as well. And this was a great solution until the network operator in whose network all of these batteries were installed started to call us because they were seeing significant amounts of solar export all coming into the network at a particular time when all of these batteries became full in the middle of the morning as a consequence of this greedy solar algorithm. Now, the point of this story is not to say that we shouldn't use virtual power plants, but it's just to recognize that there are very significant considerations that arise from the algorithmic choices we have to make to satisfy both the customers whose assets we're managing, but also the network and system operator whose energy system these assets are operating in. This story is a really good segue into the broader discussion about the important role that customers are going to play when it comes to grid edge technologies. And I think as an engineer, it's really important that we think about this very clearly. When we first built large electricity and energy systems, we tended to think of them as purely technical systems. Then over the last 20 years, we've also added markets. And so now we tend to think of them as techno-economic systems. But as we start to incorporate customer assets and grid edge technologies, we have to recognize that we're actually talking about a socio-techno-economic system. In that context, we need to be really clear about how we operate all of these assets for the benefit of customers, whilst also maintaining energy reliability and energy security. One of the ways that we're approaching this in our work and in many other projects in Australia is to explicitly involve social scientists into the work that we do. These social scientists complement the engineers and economists who are working on these projects and work to understand customer expectations so that as we design and implement these grid edge technologies, we're able to do so in a way that also achieves good customer outcomes. Something that is very clear from our interdisciplinary work with distributed energy resources and grid edge technologies is that you quickly realize that customers are actually well equipped to make choices and to spend their money to achieve the outcomes they want. They may not be the outcomes that as engineers and economists we describe as economically or technically rational, but they certainly are rational for the customers who are making the choice. As a consequence, we need to ensure that our future electricity system supports the needs and expectations of these very customers whose grid edge technologies we're incorporating into the operation of the electricity and energy systems and markets. Now, thus far, I've focused heavily on the kind of grid edge technologies that we're seeing in the Australian context, but Australia also has a very traditional centralised electricity infrastructure. In many parts of the world, such traditional grid infrastructure doesn't exist. And it's in these parts of the world that we're starting to see the emergence of microgrids, which are not constrained by the choices of legacy infrastructure. In Australia, we are seeing early work and microgrids emerging in remote parts of the country that have not traditionally had electricity network and generation infrastructure. And in those microgrids, we're seeing a proliferation of solar and battery storage. Interestingly, we're also seeing a really strong economic case for getting rid of some of our traditional electricity infrastructure, particularly in regional areas where large amounts of distribution network infrastructure service only a small number of customers. Because of the rapidly declining cost of solar and battery storage, we can more effectively service these communities with microgrids. The other point that I would make is that in Australia, we tend to think of electricity supply being purely AC supply. However, in many developing parts of the world, there's an increasing trend towards the use of DC microgrids. And this makes good sense, given that solar and batteries themselves are typically DC, and most of the appliances that we wish to supply power to are also DC. What will be interesting over the years ahead is to think about what we can learn from the DC microgrid developments going on around the world. And I can certainly foresee Australia may very well move towards a combination of AC and DC electricity grids in future. So having set the context for some of the grid edge technologies that we're already seeing today, what about the grid edge technologies of tomorrow? Well, to achieve our decarbonisation goals, by 2050, the world is going to have to electrify everything as quickly as possible. And this will mean significant amounts of electrification at the grid edge. We've already discussed distributed energy generation and storage assets being installed in the grid, but electrification is also going to mean the electrification of heating and cooling, and perhaps most importantly, the electrification of transport. On the transport front, there are numerous trials underway in Australia demonstrating the value of managed EV charging and vehicle-to-grid or V2G technologies. These V2G capabilities will allow electric vehicles to contribute to energy reliability and energy security by adding yet another form of energy storage into our electricity system. We often refer to electric vehicles as simply batteries on wheels. The future is also going to be all about grid integration. Once you have lots of different grid edge technologies, including solar, storage, electric vehicles, virtual power plants, microgrids, the list goes on, you need to ensure that all of these assets can work effectively together. In that context, grid integration refers to the control, the optimization, the coordination, and the orchestration techniques that we're going to need to bring all of these disparate devices together to deliver energy reliability and energy security for the future. To make sure we get the best from our grid edge technologies, we really need to see this grid integration capability as a key technology piece that needs significant further research, development, and demonstration. So at this point, we've arrived at the end of my presentation for today, and I hope that I've been able to illuminate the fundamental role that grid edge technologies and distributed energy resources will play in reshaping global electricity and energy systems. By being owned and operated by customers, grid edge technologies can literally put power back in the hands of customers. In that context, they promise a revolutionary transformation to a grid that is not only decarbonised, decentralised and digitised, but one which is ultimately democratised as well. And that's an exciting future that we can all look forward to. My thanks again for the opportunity to present today, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference.
Hi, my name is Seung. It is my great honor to make a presentation at CAETS 2021 conference. My topic for presentation is the changes and plans for energy transition in Korea. Well, I'm a professor at Electrical Engineering School of the University of Seoul National University. My major area is the electrical power system. I studied and worked for the electrical power system for my whole life, especially in the last 20 years. My research topic was concentrated on the smart grid, microgrid, renewable energies, and HVDCs. And my interest is how we can transform from the conventional electrical power system to the future system. That's my topic, the research topic. And also I worked for the Korean government as an advisor for energy policies. See, well, energy transition from fossil energy to the renewable and green energy is the global trend. I know that many of the countries already declared their own plan how they will transit from the conventional energy to the green energy. And Korea is not an exception. Well, about 3 years ago, our government declared that we will introduce up to 20% of electrical generation from renewable energies by 2030. You mean the 20% of generation means about 60% of the capacity, considering the operating time of the renewable energies. Well, up to that plan, we have to install about 64 gigawatts renewable energies in Korea. Right now, we have about 120 gigawatt fossil fuel and nuclear power plant. This plant supplies to many people. Wow, how can we do that? Can we do that? But more surprisingly, COVID-19 attacked the whole world last year. And Korea also experienced a serious economic recession. Our government declared that we have to make the plan the Green New Deal. In the Green New Deal, we will pursue low carbon, green energy, and green industries. And we hope to create a new industry suitable for the post-corona era. And the government plans to invest more than $60 billion for economic boost and hope to create more than 660,000 jobs. That is the summary of the Korean New Deal. Well, for Korean New Deal, should make the ecosystem that by that way they will the sustainable and they make its own the benefit. We need a new green market, new green infrastructure, new green customers, and green energies. All these four poles are necessary, but Korea is not ready yet. That is our challenge and the problem we have to tackle today. More surprisingly, about the October last year, Korean government eventually declared the net zero plan. We will reduce our carbon to zero or carbon neutral until year 2050. We know that more than 130 countries around the world have already joined the net zero plan. Especially in the EU, all the countries participated. And US was the last president time, they delayed. However, the new President Biden is very actively making many policies. And China also declared that they will achieve carbon neutral until 2060. That's what we know. By achieving the carbon neutral, we have to do active and proactive actions for the survival of mankind and also for the future of the Korea. The transition to low carbon society, we like to make the all kind of effort to reduce the greenhouse gases. In this year, the Korean government launched Committee of the Carbon Neutral. That is, this committee will control all the carbon neutral policies and the strategies. And according to that kind of the plan, the Korea also showed the many the practical plans. As you can see in the map, the Korea is the peninsula. On the southeast side of our Korean peninsula is located on the seashore. So we have the huge amount of the resources for renewable powers at that area. And our government plans to make the world's largest offshore wind farm. That is up to about 8 gigawatts. And CAPCO is the power company in Korea. That is the largest company the power company in the world. SK, ENS, Hwan, Doosan, and many major Korean companies are willing to join for that program. And the plan is we plan to invest about $42 billion. Most of them come from the private side, and government will make the investment about $1 billion for infrastructure. The Honam area is the southwest corner of the Korean peninsula. there are three the local government. One is the Jeonnam, and the other one is the Jeonbuk, and then Gwangju City. These three local governments are located very closely, and they declared RD 300 plan. Until 2020, they will make the achieve the RD 100. Until 2040, RD 200. Until 2050, RD 300. That means they will produce green energy 3 times more power, more energy than they need on that area. So most of the green energy will be exported to the other area, to the industrial region, to achieve the nationwide RD 100. And by stimulating that kind of plan, many of the Korean companies are preparing for RD 100. Especially the LG Electronics. You may know the LG Electronics. That is very famous company, and they are producing lots of the electronic stuffs. They declared the RD 100 plan until 2050. So they will replace all the energy resources to the renewable energy to the factories in the US. By 2021. The other overseas factories should be replaced by 2025. And in Korea, they have most of the factories located in Korea. They will replace 60% until 2030, 90% by 2040, 100% by 2050. It is very interesting, right? In the overseas factories, they will achieve RD 100 until 2025. However, in homeland, in Korea, they plan to change it until 2050. That tests how difficult to make the RD 100 in Korea. See, well, we have many challenges and problems to solve to achieve the RD 100 and the carbon neutral or the energy transition in Korea. One problem is the energy industry structure of Korea. The structure of the electrical power industry in Korea is very unique. We have 6 power generation companies. That's the big companies, and many small independent power producers, community energy companies, and all together they are supplying electric power to the Korea. 6 big companies and many other small companies all together. We have a KPX, Korea Power Exchange, that operates the market, energy market, and also they are operating the electric power, the power system of Korea. That's the independent operator. The CAPCO is the power company, the largest power company in the world. They own all the transmission facilities and distribution networks of Korea. And they are purchasing electric powers from the power companies, generation companies, and sell it to the general customers. Maybe 99% of the electric power will be purchased by the CAPCO, and they are selling. They are kind of the monopoly in Korea. The real problem is this. This structure is strictly controlled by government. Even the CAPCO, they cannot change the electrical prices by themselves. They have to get the permission from the government. And the government is strictly suppress the prices. And generally, the electric power, the cost price in Korea is quite lower than the EU. And also the energy market is very immature. So in order to by selling and buying the renewable energies and green energies, we have the new free market. However, this old infrastructure of the electric power system, the power industry in Korea is still controlled by government. We have a long way to go But there are big struggles and the conversations and the argument and the discussions on this area. It was a long time, but I think these discussions will be very big debate from now on. The renewable energy right now, the year 2020 in Korea is about 60% of the total power capacity, and only 7% of the total power generation. So we are just the starting point of the renewable energy area, and we have to increase it to 2050, maybe about 60% of the total power to achieve the net zero scenario. It means that we have to develop huge amount of the renewable energies in Korea. See, the generation, the capacity 60% of total power means that usually renewable energy operates only 20%. So we have to install about 3 or 4 times more generation capacity in renewable than we have the right now. It's a big challenge. See, also Korea is isolated country. You know that the Korea is divided between South and North, and I'm living in the South Korea, and North Korea is attached to the China, but we are not connected together. In Korea, the South Korean power system is 60 Hertz, AC transmission and distribution line system. It's quite stable. Power quality in Korea is the world best. However, that is the AC system. AC system is very limited for accepting the renewable energies. We have a big island on the southern part, that is the Jeju Island. The Jeju Island is connected to the mainland by the HVDC system number 1 and 2, the undersea cables. We are planning, developing, constructing the third line. Anyway, except the Jeju area, all other systems are AC system. It has limited capabilities for the renewable energies. So we need totally new electric power grid to achieve the energy transition and the carbon neutral. I think there should be two new systems should be installed. One is for the microgrid to accept the small scale. For example, the solar power, solar energies or small scale energy. We need the green hub system for renewable energies. And also we need HVDC, DC system to make our power network more flexible. Otherwise, we may not accept this huge amount of the renewable energies. See, it's not easy too. We have to develop and install and start constructing the new electric power system. That is another challenge we have to solve. See, the globally, I already told you that more than 130 countries declared the net zero plan until 2050. And many global organizations are leading and helping these activities. However, there are many variations depending on each country, because every country has their own situations. They have all different plans. But in my opinion, to achieving the net zero by a single country, by themselves, by alone, is not necessary and it's not possible. I think global cooperation is essential. Net zero for the global area is meaningful. Net zero for the only one country is meaningless. So it is time to make the global cooperation more and more tightly. Like I told you, the Korea is divided to North and South Korea. The first problem we have to solve in Korea is we have to connect North and South. The North Korea is the gateway to the Russia and China. Because North Korea is blocked between the China and Russia from the South Korea. South Korea is totally isolated island. By connecting the North Korea, we will connect to the China and Russia. So if we can connect to China and Russia through the North Korea, we may connect to Japan. As you can see on the right, the map, by that way, we can export and import the power from the other countries. By that way, we can make the meaningful and the much more economic the net zero society. Well, I'd like to go to my conclusion. We are confronting many of the uncertainties. Many of the countries, the plans are aimed to year 2050. 2050 is 40 years later. Nobody knows what will happen at that time exactly. There may be some technical development. As an engineer, I may predict until 2030, depending on the currently available technologies. I may tell what will happen 2030. However, I cannot know what will be the new technologies available on 2050. On 2050, the technology can be unimaginable. The technology can be useful in that time, but we cannot know. We don't know right now. Another change is the social and the economic situations. We have the global regulations, environmental regulations, and the resource inventories, and so on. There should be many other the situations will be changed, and that is most of the changes may be beyond the scope of the engineering. And also the another possibility is the international interconnections. Well, I nearly think if we can connect together, we will make the things easier. But if we do not connect together, the problem will be very hard to, more and more difficult to solve. So in my opinion, as a conclusion, we have to make the progressive plan update depending on the changes. So on this year, right now, in year 2021, we can predict 2030 situation, make the detailed plan on 2030. But later on, after 2030, we nearly don't know what will happen. So we can make the big picture. However, we have to wait for a while, and then if there's something is changing, and at 2030, we can make the plans on the next year, next step. This is all I prepared on today. Thank you.